Hi guys, in this video we're going to be learning how to add fractions. Now ultimately this is a fairly simple concept, but there is kind of a trick to it and it's not just as simple as one might think on first inspection. So I'm going to start off this video teaching you how to do it wrong. I'm going to teach you the incorrect way to do it so that we then have a better understanding of why the correct method works. So let's take this example here first of all. We have 1/2 plus 1/4. Now you would think, looking at this, that we add the two top numbers and we add the two bottom numbers and then we get a new fraction. So 1 plus 1 is 2 and 2 plus 4 is 6. So you would think 1/2 plus 1/4 equals 2/6. This is incorrect. That is not the way that we do it. So just adding the numerators together and the denominators together will get you the wrong answer. Let's have a wee look at why. So here are two visual representations of this. We have a half here and we have a quarter over here. Now you can tell just to look at them that when we add them together we don't get something that looks like 2/6. 2/6 is tiny. In fact, it's a third, the equivalent of a third. This is not a third. In fact, you can tell to look at that, that's 3/4, isn't it? So how come when we added them together we didn't get 3/4? Well, the problem is we were comparing two different things. We were comparing a half and a quarter. Think of them as being like different species of animal. There's no way that they can mix together. It's just not going to work. And it's the same here. So how do we get halves and quarters to mix? Well, we make them the same. We need to find a way of making either a quarter into a half or a half into a quarter. Well, let's leave the quarter as it is. But this half, I think we can make that into a quarter. Is there a way of turning this half into some number of quarters? Well, yes. If I take this 2 and multiply it by 2, I get 4. But as with everything in maths, whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other side. So because I multiplied this by 2, I have to multiply that by 2. So it's actually 1/2 is actually 2/4. And you can see that, if I draw in the dotted line there, 1/2 and 2/4 are equal. But now we can mix them. Okay, so we've got 2/4 plus 1/4 gives us 3/4. So our job in this situation is to make the denominators, the bottom numbers, the same before we add fractions together. This is what's called finding the lowest common denominator. We have to make the denominators the same. So, here's another example here. This one is similarly easy to before. We've got 2/3 plus 1/6. Okay, well, I can see how they're related, and I'm fairly sure we can turn this third into a sixth quite easily. So let's try that. Well, we're going to keep the 1/6 the same, but 2/3, if we double the 3, we'll get 6, but then we'll also have to double the 2. So let's try that. So we'll end up with 6 on the bottom, 6 is the denominator, and then that 2, if I double it, is going to become 4. So it's going to be 4/6 plus 1/6, which then ultimately will give us 5/6. So you can see that the method works again there. We'll take another example. Now, this one's a little bit different. It's a little bit trickier. In this case, I've got 1/4 plus 1/3. Now, there is no way that I can turn that 4 into a 3. And I can't turn that 3 into a 4. You might be thinking, oh, no, you can. You just add 1. But no, the rule is we're not allowed to add things to our fractions. You can only turn one fraction into another fraction by multiplying it. So I can't multiply this 3 and turn it into a 4. There's no way of doing that. So instead, is there a different number that we could turn both of these things into in order to make them the same? Is there a station of the 3 times table is also shared by a station of the 4 times table? Do the 3 times table and the 4 times table share a station together? Well, the answer is yes. They both share 12 together. 4 times 3 is 12. 3 times 4 is 12. So we can turn both of these into 12. So let's do that. So I've got 4 here. I'm going to times it by 3, and it's going to turn it into a 12. But because I times the bottom by 3, I have to times the top by 3. So I'm going to end up with 3 twelfths for this fraction here. So 1/4 becomes 3 twelfths. And now this one, to turn 3 into 12, I need to times it by 4. So it becomes a 12, but because I times the bottom by 4, I have to times the top by 4, and I get my answer there. So it's actually 3 twelfths plus 4 twelfths. The answer then, quite simply, is 7 twelfths. Now, you can solve any adding sum involving fractions using this method. You just have to find the lowest common denominator. And it's quite telling that in this case, all we had to do was look at the 3, look at the 4, and then basically multiply them together. There's a hint there, and that's one of the methods that we can use to solve it. So lastly, I've got 2 more examples for you to work through on your own. I'm going to put up the answers in just a second, but see if you can find the lowest common denominator for both of these here, and the lowest common denominator for both of these here. And I'm going to reveal the answers in 3, 2, 1. So here are our answers. In this case, the lowest common denominator for fifths and quarters was 20. So we were able to turn them both into 20. So 1/5 became 4/20ths, 3/4 became 15/20ths, and then we added them together to become 19/20ths. In this example, the lowest common denominator between 7 and 8 was 56. So 2 sevenths became 16/56ths, and 3 eighths became 21/56ths, which we could then add together to make 37/56ths. Now in these cases, these are quite complicated fractions, but in some cases, you'll then have the opportunity to simplify your answer. But not all cases. So in these 2 cases here, these are actually as simple as these particular fractions get. But that's how it works. We find the lowest common denominator, and then we add the fractions together. Cheers, guys!